The old exchange of 1515 was simply a merchant's house, equipped with a traditional tower. In the courtyard, men of business could conduct their affairs under the eye of God. These arches remain of the old building, carrying some of the arms of the influential families which patronized the Bourse. 15 years later, Domien de Bagamagra was commissioned to build a new Bourse, using a similar plan, but considerably enlarged. The conservative style of this building, with its cusped semi-Gothic arches, similar to the old exchange, belies the innovations it incorporates. Here merchants from all over the world could buy and sell commodities or shares in Europe's first mature credit exchange. This is where the credit was raised for large-scale investments, foreign expeditions, or armies of occupation. But much of Antwerp's wealth was accumulated in the fairs, which by the 1560s continued virtually without interruption in the summer months. This is the Mare, the main thoroughfare. In Venice, the trading and commercial center of the Rialto was being transformed. The old wooden bridge was at last rebuilt after a public competition in 1588. A disastrous fire in 1514 had destroyed the medieval market, which was rebuilt using the same foundations. The Rialto market still functions today. In the 16th century, regulation strictly controlled the location of markets, concentrating most of the activity in the Rialto, where it could be supervised. On the other hand, the state intervened to provide efficient, purpose-built facilities for the tradesmen. This range of offices, the Fabbriche Nuove, were built by Sansovino in the 1550s, combining utility with an imposing frontage along the Grand Canal. The whole market was thus equipped with an up-to-date and efficient setting. This is the arcade of the Fabbriche Vecchie, built in the 1520s, where merchants met to do business. The shops in the loggie were provided with rare access for loading. Just behind, here, the Goldsmiths had their confraternity building. Now, the Goldsmiths played a crucial role in the market activities, exchanging currencies, and they performed the essential banking services at open benches, or banchi. The market is overlooked by one of the oldest churches in Venice, San Giacometto al Rialto. As in the case of St. Mark's, the Byzantine origins of the little church were retained in later rebuilding, adding an important luster to its authority. Here, the Goldsmiths' confraternity had their altar. These statues belonged originally to their altar in the confraternity house. Just as the Piazza San Marco incorporates and expresses the juxtaposition of religious, civic, and intellectual authority, the Rialto Campo too brings together the commercial life of the city under the dominance of church and state. The life of the market was closely regulated. On the Colonna del Bando, imposingly contrived from a column, symbol of authority, and a crouching slave, the Comandador read out new edicts and passed sentence. And the state officials in charge of commercial activity had their offices and courtrooms right here, in the Palazzo dei Camerlenghi, and on the other side of the bridge, the Palazzo dei 10 Savi, where the 10 wise men governed the Rialto market. But Venice was an international market. Facilities were required for the foreign communities. Strategically placed, right at the heart of commercial Venice, was the Fondaco dei Tedeschi, where the German merchants stayed and traded. This was a functional as well as a representational building. Here goods could be stored until the market was right to sell. And the imposing portal, with its Venetian lion, testifies to the importance of the commercial links involved. In Antwerp, the German community was housed in the new northern extension to the city. This is the house of the Easterlings, or North Germans, almost as imposing as the town hall. Wide canals were provided to bring the boats up from the river and to encourage investment in warehouses. Another large warehouse, known as the Hessen House, has survived to this day. Once again, the imposing scale of this building can be explained by the need to store goods from one season to the next. The interior also provided a refuge for the German community in troubled times. For several years, there was a Lutheran chapel up here, where Germans could worship without external interference. The high portals were designed to allow access for the high hooped wagons used in the overland trade to the east. The quality of the brick and stone masonry, known locally as streaky bacon, is very impressive in a town in which speed of construction was often more important than quality. For example, the typical merchant's house was built quickly to a virtually standard plan and elevation. The rapidity of Antwerp's rise and decline is clearly visible in these buildings. The minimum of soft sandstone dressings are used to stiffen constructions based on mediocre brick walls. This house was one of a substantial development laid out and built in little over 2 years from 1548. The development consisted of a new weigh house and square, with the streets leading off it. You can see the goods waiting to be weighed and stamped. The weigh house is gone, but the square and streets still record the scale and ambition of the undertaking. The man who was responsible for this and for many other urban schemes was Gilbert Van Schunebeck. He was a property developer, an industrial entrepreneur of a radically modern kind. Van Schunebeck's most ambitious scheme was tied to his own career as a brewer. In 1548, he negotiated with the town council to add a huge new extension to the north of the city, undertaking to pay not only for the layout of the streets, but also 3 wide canals and the whole stretch of fortifications needed to enclose it. On one of these canals, he built a pumping station, designed to supply clean water to the area through an ingenious system of conduits and pipes. Underneath the house, fresh water was collected here and then drawn up by a bucket chain, turned by a donkey gin. From this reservoir on the roof, the water could be piped to adjoining breweries in oak conduits. Although the brewers fought Schunebeck during his lifetime and instigated ugly beer riots which led to his ruin, they later adopted this as their new guild house. Schunebeck was a new kind of capitalist whose success and fate both matched the sudden rise and fall of Antwerp. And one reason for the fragility of Antwerp's fate is obvious. She never fully controlled the Scheldt, on which her trade depended. Most of the riverborne trade was carried in foreign vessels, and there was no effective navy to defend them. If Venice was a more stable city than Antwerp, one important factor was this: the arsenal, where nearly 1/10 of the population of the city worked. The land gate of the arsenal was one of the first works of Venetian Renaissance architecture, bristling with confidence. The Lion of St. Mark is frankly bellicose in this context, the one which would have been recognized by Venetian dependencies all over the Adriatic and eastern Mediterranean. Through this gateway, originally slightly narrower, came the galleys which maintained the freedom of the seas for Venetian trade. At the time of the Battle of Lepanto, as many as 360 galleys could be built or fitted out here in a year. These building and repair sheds were originally open-ended and provided with slipways for launching the galleys. Here a galley could be built or repaired within months to join the armadas which collected every year to fight the Turks. The army of workers who cut and worked the wood, caulked the hulls, cut the masts and stitched the sails, all had their own guilds and confraternities. The scale of operations was enormous. This is the 16th century rope factory. The hemp was loaded in at the upper level and carded and drawn on the balconies before being wound down here. Such was the priority given to defence that the Republic took steps to ensure the loyalty of its sailors and oarsmen, most of whom were volunteers. These three ranges of houses, for example, were built at the state's expense to provide homes for sailors who'd performed well in overseas campaigns. At the other end of Europe, when the Dutch privateers captured Flushing in 1572, only the Protestant alliance could keep the Scheldt open. So when Antwerp finally fell under Spanish rule in 1585, her access to the sea was broken for 2 centuries. By contrast, Venice's leading contribution to the fleet, which crushed the Turks at the Battle of Lepanto, was to help secure its survival for another 200 years.